Zen and the art of love in politically turbulent times. शहर में शोर है, नारों की गर्द है, हर जुबां पर यकीन कम और यकीनों पर तलवार ज़्यादा है. इस हंगामे में मोहब्बत करना बगावत नहीं, रियाजत है. हम चीखने नहीं, हम सांस लेते हैं, हम उंगलियां नहीं उठाते, हम हाथ जोड़ते हैं. ज़ैन कहता है, अगर दुश्मन सामने हो तो पहले अपनी धड़कन को शांत करो. मोहब्बत कहती है, अगर नफरत पुकारे तो आवाज़ ऊंची मत करो, गहरी करो. इस दौर में प्यार करना आसान नहीं, क्योंकि हर चीज़ को रंग दिया जा चुका है, जिस्म को, जज्बात को और इंसान को भी. फिर भी हम प्यार करते हैं चुनाव के खिलाफ नहीं, चुनाव के साथ. हम चुन लेते हैं खामोशी जब दुनिया शोर मांगती है. हम चुन लेते हैं समझना जब निज़ाम सिर्फ फैसला चाहता है. ज़ैन हमें सिखाता है कि हर जंग जीतनी ज़रूरी नहीं, और मोहब्बत हमें याद दिलाती है कि हर जीत ज़रूरी नहीं होती. As the festival continues, we now arrive at a session that sites at a delicate intersection between the personal and the political, between love and uncertainty, between inner calm and a world in constant flux. Zen and the art of love in politically turbulent times invites us to explore how intimacy, relationships, and emotional resilience survive and sometimes deepen amid moments of social and political unrest. This is a conversation about love that is not removed from reality but shaped by it. We are delighted to welcome Shabnam Minwalla, a writer whose life and work are deeply rooted in Mumbai and its many contradictions. Ma'am, we invite you over the dais. A lifelong journalist and storyteller, Shabnam Minwalla has worked with the Times of India and written columns, features, and non-fiction books that chronicle the city's social and cultural fabric. She is best known for her writing for children and young adults, with popular titles including The Six Spellmakers of Dorabji Street, What Maya Saw, Saira Zariwala is Afraid, and the much-loved Nimi series. Her novel, Zen, part romance, part history, part politics, has received widespread acclaim and was honored with the Crossword Award, the Author Award, the Valley of Words Award, and the Binod Kanoria Award in 2024. She is also the recipient of the Neve Book Award and the Atta Galata Bangalore Literature Festival Prize for her other works. Beyond writing, Shabnam teaches creative writing at a Mumbai college and conducts workshops in schools across the country. She holds an MA in journalism from the University of Southern California, Los Angeles, and was a Chevening Scholar at Wolfston College, Cambridge. Joining her in conversation is Devanshi Khetarpal, a writer and translator with deep academic and creative engagements across continents. Ma'am, we invite you on the dais. Devanshi is a graduate of Iowa Writers Workshop, where she studied fiction as a Sony Mehta and Truman Capote Fellow. She is currently an MFA candidate in literary translation in the University of Iowa and serves as a graduate research assistant for the university's International Writing Program. She completed her bachelor's and master's degree in comparative literature from New York University, specializing in Italian studies. Her work has appeared in publications such as Three Penny Review, The Master's Review, Indiana Review, Public Books, Scroll, and Poetry at Sangam. She is also an associate poetry editor from the Bombay Literary Magazine. Her writing and translation work have been supported by institutions including the Iowa Translation Workshop, Bread Loaf Translators Conference, Andrew Mellon Foundation, and the NYU Center for the Humanities. She is the recipient of James Meshner Copernicus Society Award, a finalist for American Short Fiction Halifax Ranch Prize, and received an honorable mention for the Proofer Poetry Prize. Devanshi translates from Hindi and Italian and is currently working on a collection of short stories set in Bhopal, along with a novel, She is from Bhopal. Together, our speakers bring literary depth, political awareness, and emotional sensitivity to this dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm round of applause as I invite Shabnam Minwalla and Devanshi Khetarpal to begin this conversation on Zen and the art of love in political turbulent times. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for. Okay, it's working. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you all for being here. And before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone who's put this event together, because a lot of labor goes into setting up every single thing. And I would like to now begin our conversation. It's lovely to be in conversation with you, Shabnam. So I had the privilege of reading your novel, Zen, before this month. Actually, it was the first book that I read this year. So wonderful reading to begin the new year with. I thought maybe we could begin by you giving us a little synopsis of the book, perhaps, just so that our readers get to hear your idea of the book in your own words.
Sure. So, actually, more than the book itself, the story of how the book was born with a story, which we'll talk about later. But Zen is essentially a genre that I thought I would never in my life write, which is some romance, some politics, and then, of course, because I love murder so much, a bit of a murder mystery thrown in for good measure. Because I wrote this whole book and I thought, it's not feeling, there's something missing. So then I put in a nice dead body. So it's a book set in two timelines. One is contemporary. Young people, like so many in the audience, Zen is approximately your age and has lived approximately through what many of you have lived through. And her great-grandmother, a woman named Zainab, whom she's named after, who happened to live in 1935. And Zainab came to me through a family diary, but I'll talk about that later.
Yeah, and the structure of the novel is quite interesting because it alternates between these two timelines, and we know Zainab, the great-grandmother of the eponymous character, Zainab, or Zen, as she calls herself, through the diaries. And so we can talk about the diaries and this alternating structure and how you arrived at that. Well, I also would love to know more about, for the sake of our audiences, the political context in which you decided to set this, because many of us are still living in the wake of that, or it's very contemporary to us. So if you could talk about the choice to set it at that particular junction of time.
So in a way, the story of Zen for me began about 7 or 8 years ago when I woke up one morning and did what I think too many of us do. We brush our teeth, we have our tea, and what do we do next? What do all of you do? Check your phone. I checked my phone, very bad. And I found, to my great delight, that I had been added to a chat called Love Letters. Now, when you're my age, you're quite thrilled to be added to a chat called Love Letters, and I opened it with some degree of glee. It was not what I immediately imagined, but it was even more interesting. The chat had been started by my cousin's husband. My cousin Monisha, she's a second cousin. Her nani and my nani were sisters. When her nani was dying, her nani had sort of summoned her and said, Monisha, come here. So Monisha had gone there. I mean, when your nani is dying and summons you with a crooked, bony finger, you go. And she said, yes, Mamaji, what? So her granny, who was a very masterful and quite scary lady, quite a dragon woman, handed her a package and said, keep this safely. So Monisha said, okay. And she took it. And you know, your granny's died. She had 2 little children. So she did what many of us would do. She took that package and shoved it in a cupboard. Few years later, she was doing what many of us do when we don't have other things to do, cleaning cupboards. And she found the packet. This time she opened it. And she found, to her absolute amazement and delight, that it was pages from her grandmother's diary that her granny had written when she was 19 in 1935. She read the pages and she, of course, added me to this chat and sent me pictures from this diary. So For some reason, my Masi Zulekha was very stingy about what she handed over to Monisha, and she just handed about 20 pages from the diary. But they were revelatory pages, okay? So the first page began with, "Today I got engaged. God bless that boy. How did he know I liked emeralds and chocolates?" Well, not so difficult. But very quickly, the mood turned dark. So about 3 entries later, she's starting to ask, is it possible to love someone whose arms you have been thrust into? Now remember, this is my Nani's sister, okay? Muslim woman, 1935. What stereotype in your head of a Muslim girl in 1935? I mean, what is the image in your head? Any stereotypes? Yeah, even I imagine parda, very small life, hurtling back and forth, praying lots of namaz, going to the mosque. You know, we inherit these stereotypes. We are born with them. This diary indicated a very different life and a very different inner world, especially. So this woman sulks. I'm sick of Ramzan. I get migraines every day. Every day they send me to the mosque. Bus now, enough. And then she goes to see a movie. So she's going and doing normal things like movies. And then she writes, horrible movie, farmer takes a wife. Wish I had stayed at home and made malido instead. And she hated cooking. So this was her sign that it was really dire. Anyway, what was really interesting about this diary, and comes around 6 or 7 pages in, is that this girl who is engaged to this very proper Bori Muslim boy has a romantic interest, a Hindu boy who happens to live in her building. And they seem to be having some sort of romance. Now, none of this is very clearly delineated, okay? It all comes in little hints. So one day the boy she's engaged to, the sister brings his photograph to show her. And so she says, today I saw his photograph. I wanted to cry. He's not a patch on my... And then she has this Gujarati word for the boy she's in love with. Some awful word. We couldn't figure it out. Gabbar or gablo or something like that. Anyway, he's not a patch on my gablo. Then a few pages in, she says, I was looking out of the window. He was walking on the arcades. He turned to look at me. He has not forgotten me. His rhythmic walk is glorious. And I am thinking, this is Masi Zulekha. It was really quite something. More interesting even, or as interesting and quite sad actually, is that along with the pages, the stingy pages of the diary that she had left for us, were 3 poems written by the boy. And they were graphic poems. I've used one of the poems in the book and I had to censor it because there was a word there, a word that rhymes with ripple, which would not go down well with our young adult audience. So, you know, it was for me a real revelation that no matter what rules people impose, no matter what society expects, human beings are human beings. They feel, they care, they fight, they break barriers, and they do what they have to. And you know, whenever I go to schools, and I go to a lot of schools because I'm largely a children's writer, I ask the children, how do you think Monisha and I felt when we found the pages of this diary? So I'm going to ask you the same question. How do you think we felt? How would you feel if you found your great-grandmother's diary or somebody like that's diary and saw this? Original, yeah. So you're like startled. You feel connected, no? Yeah. Impressed. Yeah. Thrilled, no? Me too. Wonderful. Please send them to me. I will write a book. But yeah. So, you know, so interestingly and sadly, you go to schools, especially co-ed schools, all the little boys will put up the hand and say, shocked, disgusted. And then one brave little girl will put up a hand and say, I felt very happy. I would feel, and you feel, yes, you are, you know, you are my audience. So Monisha and I were delighted. And Monisha gave me this parcel of letters and she said, do something with it. The only reason my granny gave it to me and not to her own children, my mother and my uncle, is because she knew that they would probably throw it away or hide it. And she knew that I would not. So I inherited this bundle of diary entries, but I didn't know what to do with it. I told my editor, and she said, write a book. There were two reasons why I didn't want to write a book. One, I don't write romance. Two, I don't know anything about 1935. Like, I was really plagued with all these questions. And I'm going to ask you, in 1935, did they have a phone in their house? Phones were just coming in. So a few lucky people had phones in the house, but there were quite a few public phones. In 1935, did they have fridges in their houses? This is it. When you do enough research, you find answers. And I realized, I was leafing through the newspapers of 1935, and I found an ad by the Bombay Electric and Supply and Transport Company, and it said, new invention. For 14 rupees 75 paisa, you can rent a fridge. This is a new device which will keep your food fresh. So I had my answer. And poor Zainab, her first conversation with her husband-to-be is about a fridge. So anyway, I didn't want to write this book. And then in 2019, something happened that we all have lived through. The CA protests were happening around the country. My daughters were very involved. They made banners and they went and waved them around and felt very happy that they were, engaging with the world. Again, I mentioned this to my editor, and she said, write a book. And suddenly it struck me that maybe I should write a book about two girls, connected in some way, but living very different lives at two turning points of our nation. And that is how Zen was born.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could maybe read from the section set in 2019, or even one of the letters or a section from the letter, just to give a sense of because the letters are sort of this like endearing private language, and it's a diary, so it's inward looking, and we are sort of the audience who are privy to this private life of a woman in the 30s, and then Zen is a very strong, very brazen character, so yeah, maybe just to get a sense of the tone and the shift.
The contemporary one first, or the diary first?
Maybe the contemporary one first. And
so I'll set the scene. The book actually begins with Zen. She's in the 11th grade. She's 17, 18. And she and her best friend are painting posters for a debate at school. And her mother comes in and says, Zenu, what is wrong with you? Now, Zen is from a mixed background, okay? So she is the great-granddaughter of Zainab. Dad is Muslim, mom is Hindu. Very, very ultra, non-religious, very atheist, agnostic kind of family. Does not believe in religion in any way. So the mom comes charging in and says, we have to go for a wedding. And this wedding is on the mother's side. So it's the Hindu section, of the Hindu part of the family. And the mom is getting hassled because she says, we can't be late. People will think we are being standoffish. And she's very jumpy about the whole thing. And Zen is like, okay, over here, who likes family weddings? How many of you like family weddings? And how many of you do not like family weddings? So Zen is like the majority here. So she looks sullenly at her mother. So, why do I have to go to a wedding? I don't know anybody there. And the mom flips. She says, people have come from Chicago. People have come from Singapore. People have come from Canada. And you can't drive from Colaba to Turf Club? Stop being ridiculous. Now get ready. Wash your hair. So Zen tumbles into a tight black t-shirt, a ghagra, yellow high heel stilettos, and goes. And the family is driving. They reach the shadi. And Zen has a sister, Abha, who's very outgoing and cheerful. Zen is very introverted. So when she reaches, all the cousins come and say, Abha, we are putting up a song for the Sangeet. Will you join us? And Abha immediately, yes, what song? Tu cheez badi hai, mast. Oh, great. And then they look at Zen and say, will you join us? And Zen says, and quickly skulks away. Now Zen and her mom are walking, and Zen meets, the mom sees all her cousins and says, oh, there's Sheetal, there's Monal. Come, we'll go and say hi. And Zen does not want to go into this huge knot of cousins because she is terrified. And what is this really scary question that older relatives always ask you when you go to a shadi? When will you get married, of course? About your studies, but something even scarier. 12th ka result, horrifying, but even scarier. That horrible, but even scarier. Career, all of that, but this horrible. But something worse. And that question is, do you remember me? And what are you supposed to say to that? Of course, uncle. Though you're lying. And then, but what if that uncle then goes ahead, one step ahead and asks that even worse question? Who am I? Yeah. So Zen doesn't want to get into that, so she goes off. She doesn't go with her mum. She goes to the Bhelpuri counter, and she's standing at the Bhelpuri counter waiting to place her order when, and she notices a boy standing in front of her, a boy in a rust kurta with a very American accent. And Zen is she's a very quiet person, but she's got a very rude inner voice. So she looks at this boy and she's thinking, he looks like a Maharaja's bolster cushion. What an unpleasant fellow. And his face is like, one of those Roman emperors, one of those murdering Roman emperor type. Then she takes an instant dislike to the boy. And I'll read this bit now. So the boy is trying to order bhelpuri, save puri for himself, and he's trying to tell the server not to make it spicy. So, as the women walked away with their plates, the boy in the rust kurta said, "Bhelpuri, not very spicy." Now, I don't do good American accents, so you'll have to imagine that, okay? Actually, don't put any chili at all. The request, uttered in an American accent, was drowned by the opening bars of Kala Chashma. The apron man behind the counter looked confused and asked, "Kya?" "Bhelpuri with almost no chili," the boy repeated very slowly. Again, the man shook his head. Zen watched the interchange with interest. Rust Kurta was 19 or 20 years old. He had the glossy brown skin and dazzling white teeth of Indians who've grown up eating Dunkin' Donuts and strawberries the size of shuttlecocks in places with names like Poughkeepsie and Sacramento. He had the imperious features and chiseled lips of a statue, one of the senator-murdering Roman emperor types. "Chili nahi," he said very slowly. Perhaps the apron man was thrown by the American accent. Perhaps he was irked by the patronizing, "I am dealing with a moron" tone. But he continued to gape. Rust Kurta was broad and a few inches taller than Zen. The kurta, which featured a gold paisley pattern, was both too tight and too long and gave him the unfortunate silhouette of a Maharaja's bolster. Zen noticed that the boy's politeness was peeling at the edges and his wide white American smile was wilting. With exaggerated impatience, he repeated, "No chili." The apron man behind the counter began to toss ingredients into a steel bowl: onion, save, puffed rice, tamarind chutney, and 2 hefty dollops of fiery green chutney. A moment later, he scooped the mixture onto a plate, sprinkled save, and held it aloft. "No chili, I hope," Rust Kurta repeated as he took the plate, but the white apron server had turned away to make dilli chaat for one of the shouty uncles. Zen abhorred strangers who struck up conversations at grocery stores. She was allergic to relatives who landed up at Beryl House with unwelcome advice about the virtues of a vegan lifestyle, about the benefits of praying namaz 5 times a day, about why she needed to play a sport, learn a second language, do Surya Namaskar, or have a teaspoonful of cold-pressed coconut oil every day. "Mind your own business," she always hissed in her head. So it was only natural that she in turn should mind her own business. Zen had already made up her mind by the time Rust Kurta plunged his spoon into the mound of bhelpuri and lifted it to his mouth. So she was as startled as he was by the yelp that emerged from her lips. "Stop!" she cried, loud enough to be heard over Kala Chashma. Loud enough for the fruit impersonating uncles to stop chewing and for Mr. Mango Milkshake to choke and splutter. Rust Kurta jumped so violently that a sizable quantity of bale flew off his plate. He looked around wildly, expecting an anaconda or an axe-wielding killer at the very least. Instead, all he saw were a bunch of tutting uncles. He stared balefully at Zen. "What?" he snapped as he dusted the save and onion off his kurta. "Why did you shout?" A sprinkle of save had settled on Zen's skirt as well. Flapping it briskly, Zen tried to explain. I just wanted to warn you that there's a load of chili in your bhel puri, she said, attempting to swallow an inconvenient giggle. Rust Kurta didn't echo her merriment. He didn't respond with the gratitude that Zen felt was her due, or even with an apology for splattering her and half of Sobo with save an onion. Instead, he looked furious. And how do you know that? He asked in a soft, nasty voice. I saw him add it, Zen said, startled by the venom. That green chutney is usually spicy, and I didn't want you to burn your mouth. That seemed to enrage Rust Kurta even more. I don't get it, he said. You stood around here waiting and singing away while I said no chili about 1,000 times. Then you watched while the guy probably dumped enough chili to stun a donkey. And then, just as I was about to eat the stuff, you decided to shout the place down so that all these people here probably... Now, Zen is a very cautious person and she never says random things. But today, she cannot resist. She says, they probably think you pinched me. Naturally, the fellow is furious. The Rust Kurta is mad. And he yells, you think this is funny? He spluttered. This is your idea of a joke? Ha, ha, ha. Is that what this is about? Zen flushed. She turned around on her yellow heels and thought, enough, I have been abused by this guy enough. And she marches away, thinking, I'm done with this guy and I never want to see him again. But of course, this is a romance novel. So do you really think she's done with the guy? No. That very evening, within an hour, she's stuck with taking him for a walk the next day and is a very, very cross girl.
Yeah. And those parts are really, really exciting to read, actually. And they're very, I don't know, tinged with like this idea of like teenage romance happening in a tense political environment. So it does have this like Bollywood feel to it.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you also if you could, because all the chapters open with an epigraph, sometimes from a poem, sometimes from a song, sometimes from, another text or something like that, or like an address that one of the characters' father gives in the parliament.
Correct.
And, her political beliefs are very much opposed to her father's political beliefs, and there is a whole plot line of like how that plays out in their school. So maybe I'm curious, like, what are your sources of inspiration, and what is the meaning of the song? Because sometimes the chapters reflect the mood of the song, and sometimes they're more tangentially reflective, and sometimes they are sort of imbuing the chapter with a spirit, but not exactly.
Yeah. So I feel our life, especially now with the fact that we are so constantly bombarded by visual media, the written word alone feels sometimes a bit bald. And so I feel we do live in a soup of all kinds of articles, songs, movies coming at us all the time. And so very often when I was writing a chapter, music would play in my head. Maybe just a line of a song, like towards the end, when this boy Yash is doing something rather nasty to Zen, but Zen doesn't know it. So she's like heads over heels in love. The words of the song called Stupid Girl kept going on in my head. So that was what I started the chapter with. Other times I just use Disney songs because that mushiness seemed to connect with the mood of that chapter. This book begins with Meri Desh Ki Dharti because Yash is an NRI boy, and every year his family comes back to India and they feel they are Indian, no matter that they live in Chicago. So, Meri Desh Ki Dharti. So, for me, they all had meanings, and in fact, my editor made me do a Spotify playlist for Zen, which is now, I think, there. So I'm quite tech doltish, but
we're all going to be downloading that on our Spotify right after this. I mean, there's nothing that a dead body and a Spotify playlist can't solve for but that it was very interesting also because you write teenagers you give them a lot of seriousness, and they're very that's not how maybe like as adults, we often sort of dismiss teenagers. We dismiss their activism. We dismiss the sort of burgeoning political consciousness that they have. and I found that the seriousness that you gave to it, and which was very fascinating, and drew me into the novel, because I was in college when all this was happening, and that was also like the time that our political consciousness was being raised as young adults. So I wanted to ask you, and you have 3 daughters, and you said that they were your unofficial advisors, maybe uninvited advisors sometimes, for this novel. So, how do you perceive teenagers, especially in the way that their activism and their political consciousness should participate in our world?
Well, I truly, truly believe that you never live more intensely than when you are young, when you're a teenager and in your 20s. And after that, I feel, at least I notice that intensity of emotion wears away. You accept, you believe things will work out. But when you are young, everything feels either too wonderful or too horrible. Am I right? Yeah. So I feel and of course, I write a lot for children. You cannot, in all fairness, write for children if you don't take your audience seriously. And because I have 3 daughters, it's quite grim actually, because they're my first readers. And when I was writing Zen, they were very invested in the book. And they asked, who is the boy? Who is going to be her boy? So I said, his name is Yash. His politics are very different from Zen. He's quite, he's quite a character with a lot of shadows. And then the more they heard about Yash, the more agitated they got. And they said, you will not stick Zen with that boy. The only happy ending for this book is a sad ending. We will not allow you to have a happy ending for this book, which made it so difficult for me to write. Because by the time you're my age, you realize black and white is not there. They're just many, many, many shades of gray. But I saw from my daughter's perspective, and so from my reader's perspective, it is black and white. And I didn't want my first and perhaps my only love story to have a sad ending. So I was very, very tormented. But, yeah.
But do you think it's going to be your only love story that you write? Or
no, probably not.
Yeah. Are you committed now? Are you drawn to it?
Well, right now I'm writing a very happy murder mystery, which is very relaxing.
Okay, a happy murder mystery that's very relaxing. I think that should be like quoted somewhere.
Well, I do a series called the Chickenpox Club of kids around 12, 13 who solve murders in their immediate world. So it's light-hearted because they're kids. The murder happens a little at a distance. They solve it very cleverly. So it's cheerful. Yeah. But no, so I now am working on a romance, which is giving me a lot of sleepless nights.
Which, did this book give you sleepless nights? And could you tell us about the process of working on this? Because you said that you were working on it during the lockdown, and then you took a break from it. So I'm curious, like, why was that break necessary? Or when, as a writer, do you sort of like take a break from your projects, and then when do you feel it's the right time to return?
This is the only book I've ever taken a break for, and that was partly because it is such a Mumbai book. And about very early into the book, there's the part where Yasha and Zen are going on their walk around the city. Lockdown happened. And I found it impossible to write a book that was so deeply engaged with my city when my city had vanished. Because the city, our world, just transformed so much. So I just couldn't write. I just froze at that scene. And to feel a little more normal and happy, I wrote a lockdown murder mystery about 2 buildings across from each other and a girl who sees something in the building across. A little inspired by the Hitchcock film Rear Window. And then after I wrote that and that got published, I thought, maybe I'll try to return to Zen. And this time it was easier. Yeah. But otherwise, I like to write in one huge swoop. Because writing, and I don't know how many of you are writers, a lot of it is the really difficult part, as you know, is entering that world. And once you enter, you don't want to risk opting out, because what if you are barred from it forevermore if you step out? But yeah, funnily, I found Zen easier to write the second time around. Also partly because, CA and all, you get a little distance. You see things in perspective. You do not react so much from the gut. Also, your characters grow in your head slowly. They mellow. Yash was no longer as obnoxious as his first draft. Zen was no longer as buttoned up and shy as in her first draft. Your characters grow, and yeah.
No, that's as you were speaking, I was thinking of what this writer had once told me. She said, "A novel is a marriage, a short story is an affair, and a journalism is a one-night stand," or something like that. But it was that's what came to mind, and the process of writing this book, which has appealed to older ages as well as your younger audiences. So could you talk a bit about that? Like when we had our conversation, you said that there were older people who responded to the diary section that Zainab has, and it is sort of related, like sentimentally, to what young Zen is going through, the sort of defiance, or like the sense of like questioning or doubting your environment, or looking outward into the world, because the diary also is very interesting in the sense that I was interested in how it was talking about Italy's actions in Africa, and the way that Zainab sort of writes about that, and is very engaged with that. And you read newspapers every day too. So maybe like the appeal across ages and time.
So when I was doing the 1935 part, I really didn't know how to go about doing research about the texture of everyday life. And what I did was read 1.5 years worth of newspapers. There's a newspaper called the Bombay Chronicle, which was run by Dadabhai Navroji and a bunch of freedom fighters. So it was a great source. And I read every day's newspaper for that period, read the ads, read what came on the radio, just to understand what life was like. And I think that has really clicked with an older audience, because this book, to my amazement, is become very much a standard of, book clubs and all. Especially, so the diary is written in a slightly slanted and faint font, and we suddenly started getting all these emails saying, our book club wants to do it, but we're all 70 years old, so please can you reprint in a bigger font? So they actually reprinted in a bigger font. So the next edition had about 30 or 40 extra pages, because that font grew. And so 1935 for me was a revelation. I chose that year because the diaries happened to be set there. And then, of course, you start reading the newspaper and you realize that all these amazing things, huge things are happening. World War II is approaching. Hitler is getting power in Germany. Italy is attacking Abyssinia. And all of that has ramifications in India, because we all talk about global interconnectedness today, but it's always been globally interconnected, our planet. And so there were lots and lots of little interesting things. For example, there was this absolutely brilliant story that I discovered in 1935 that your mom might have heard of, about these two brothers, Amarendra and Benoyendra or something, in Bengal. And they both inherited a big fortune from their uncle. Now, Benoyendra was a bad man, Amarendra was a good man. And Benoyendra decided that he wanted the entire fortune. So what did he do? He first found a pair of spectacles and dipped it somehow in the tetanus. Is it a virus or a bacillus? Bacillus. So he dipped it in that and hoped that his brother would die. It didn't work. Okay. So, moron fellow, he wrote to Hafkin Institute in Bombay and said, can you send me a vial of the plague bacillus? So Hafkin was appalled and said, no, of course, we can't do such a thing. What are you saying? So he came to Bombay and he bribed somebody and managed to get this plague thing. Then his brother was going off on a train journey, and a man in a filthy shawl came and pricked the brother. And the brother died of plague. And this is considered one of the 5 sort of deaths by bacteria, murders by bacteria in the world, and it's a very, very celebrated case. This happened in 1935. So there were all these wonderful stories that I found, which I pieced together in the book. So Zainab's diary, in a way, is a mosaic of her life, but also of 1935. And of course, the freedom struggle. I mean, that is the backdrop of everything. And so I wanted to give her love interest something, a mission. Freedom struggle became very obvious, an obvious device and an obvious sort of thing to give him. So a lot of her diary is really about the world around her.
Yeah, And I was also curious because as I was reading your bio, you come from a very multicultural family
Yes.
that does represent what this country is all about.
Yeah.
And that is reflected
In the book.
in the book and how your characters are, I mean, especially in the story of Zen and Abha, right? Like
Yes.
because of their names, they
Yeah.
move around the world very differently and are perceived differently.
Yes.
And so I was wondering if you could talk about how your own personal has, obviously like not only filtered into this
Yeah.
book, but it's, the political beliefs of its characters
Of course.
maybe. And
So-
then we can take questions from the audience while you
Almost all the books I write have, if not mixed characters of mixed backgrounds, characters who live in societies, because Mumbai, the old Bombay, the Bombay I grew up in, and even to an extent now, is a very multicultural space. My mom is a Bora Muslim, my dad was a Parsi, my husband is a Tambram from Chennai. We navigate all of this by, everybody says you must be celebrating so many festivals, and I have to admit we only celebrate Christmas. I don't know how that works. And we put a lot of pressure on my husband, on my brother to marry a Christian girl, and were quite disgusted when he married a Hindu Bengali, because he said, we already have a Hindu in the family. What, you're not adding anything? But yeah, so next generation can fix those holes. But yeah, so my daughters are everything, nothing. In a way, I think their only identity is as Mumbaikars, which is quite sad. But yeah, naturally, so, when I started writing fiction, I was worried. My big fear was I've grown up in such a mixed up family. I live in such a mixed up family. How will I write an authentic character? How will I write a character who's Gujarati, who's Parsi, who's Muslim? And then I realized, A, you can imagine. B, it doesn't matter. Your characters can be like you, completely. Some of your characters can be like you. It's not true to write all characters like me, because not everyone is like me. I'm a minority. But it's okay. It's one perspective from which you can write in any case. Yeah.
And it adds, these delicious complications in fiction, because
does.
as writers, we're always like, well, how can I write about this, or how can I use it for my writing?
No,
Yeah.
100%.
So yeah,
The search for material is
The
always
search.
on.
It's 24/7, 365 days a year.
Yeah.
I thought maybe we could take one question before we wrap it up. So if, or one or two questions maybe, and then we can obviously carry on the conversation after. Yeah.
I'm Rehan.
Hi.
This is not exactly a question, but I'm just connecting a few dots. Like you mentioned that when we are in a teenage, everything is either too beautiful or too horrible. And we touched up upon the black and white thinking we young people tend to have. And I just wanted to add that, yeah, like I understand why black and white thinking is denounced as a sort of bardism in our intellectual conversations, but like I think the root that is not often mentioned is that the black and white thinking stems from the fact that there is a lot on the line for us in general,
No, absolutely.
which makes it hard to stand, to detach from it and take a more balanced perspective to it.
You're right. It comes from idealism. It comes from real, raw feeling. And I appreciate that, and I miss the fact that I was once like that. And now I'm this more balanced and rather more boring person.
I don't think you're boring.
Thank you.
There's one more question. Yeah, someone has.
Yeah.
Actually, my question is very simple. I see it's on the name or the title which we have given to the book.
Zen.
Zen is originally from China, and then it is a meditation. Then it moved to Japan.
Yes.
Why did you give the name Zen? But when the character is Zenab.
Zen is short for Zainab, and she explains, she says, nobody ever thinks of me as a Zainab, because Zainabs are supposed to be delicate and elegant, and I'm this tall person with lots of untidy curly hair. So I don't fit Zainab. Zen works better for me. And yeah, I mean, it also, and people keep asking her, have you read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Repairing? And she's always irritated because she hasn't read it, and she keeps thinking, I better read it before the next person asks me this question.
Thank you.
If There's another question. Maybe we can take one?
Yes, we can take one question.
Yeah, maybe one last one. Yeah, there's one hand up there.
Hello, ma'am. There was a very, very entertaining and enlightening session. I think we're all going to go buy that book. Oh, right. Sorry, I had things. I'm Anushka, and I wanted to ask a question because you're writing from two different eras, essentially. Was it hard to create original personalities that are alive in these two different eras? Because it's one thing to research about it and write it in an indirect way, but to write a character that's directly connecting, was that hard?
Well, I wrote one in the first person because it's a diary and one in the third person. So that immediately creates that, that inner voice, outer voice helps. Secondly, my Zainab, the older character, is a very masterful, because however much I didn't want her to be my granny's sister, that was the sort of the shadow over me, Masi Zulekha. So you cannot write somebody inspired by her as a wimpy character. So she's a very tough person who makes a lot of difficult choices. To fall in love with a Hindu boy, complicated, but she does some unthinkable or difficult to think of things in that period. Zen, the current Zen, to me was a lot like me, somebody who's overthinking, who's double thinking, who's feeling very nervous about life. Her inner voice is very muddled and confused, like so many of us, I feel, that clarity is not there. So once you get voices, once you get the inner voice of a character, the character leads you. Like I'll tell you, what happened when my editor would keep saying, is the book over? And I would say, yeah, 1 month, just writing the last chapter. And I'd be, it's over. And then Zen and Yash would come and they would have another blazing fight. And it would take another year after that. So characters take over and then it's never a problem. Once your character tells you what she wants to do, you're sorted.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Shabnam. It was lovely to discuss your novel with you and to share my reading experience and to hear more from you with this lovely audience. Thank you all for being here. And thank you. I'll hand it over to you now.
And thanks for your lovely and thoughtful questions.
You're very welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, what a thoughtful and quietly powerful conversation that was. This session reminded us that love does not exist in isolation. It listens, resists, and adapts. Sometimes becomes an act of courage in itself, especially in uncertain times. A heartfelt round of applause once again for Shabnam Minwalla and Devanshi Khetarpal for bringing honesty and compassion to this discussion. To honor our distinguished guest, I would now like to invite Brigadier Sanjay Agrawal, a founding member of the Society for Culture and Environment, to kindly join us on the stage to present a token of our gratitude. This is not merely a memento. We are privileged to share with you a genuine piece of our history. This is the special BLF 2026 memento. The legendary Padma Shri Durgabai created this artwork specifically for BLF 2026. It depicts Little Gorlaya, a story of devotion, a tiny bird loved by Bhangsu, is transformed by the tribal god Burdev into a beautiful maiden bringing joy to him and his struggling family. It is a beautiful symbol of how nature and humanity are intertwined, just like the conversation we heard today. Thank you to our speakers for this enriching exchange, and thank you, Bhopal, for being such a reflective and attentive audience. Yes. Of course, sure. This is the special BLF 2026 memento. The legendary Padma Shri Durgabai created this artwork specifically for BLF 2026. It depicts Little Gorlaya, a story of devotion, a tiny bird, loved by Bhangsu, is transformed by the tribal god Burdev into a beautiful maiden, bringing joy to him and his struggling family. It is a beautiful symbol of how nature and humanity are intertwined, just like the conversation we heard today. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, audience. We look forward to welcoming you to the next session of the festival.